My project looks at veteran-owned businesses that contract with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the efforts to make sure that these contracts are actually going to people who have served in the military. So in the federal government, certain types of businesses get preferential treatment. Those include women-owned, small and disadvantaged businesses, businesses located in underutilized locations, among others, and veteran-owned businesses fall into that preferential treatment category. A 2006 law gave VA the ability to consider contracting with veterans before any other kind of preferential program. So veteran-owned businesses throughout government self-certify. So there's no verification process. But the 2006 law created a verification process at VA alone, and that increased the scrutiny of these businesses to make sure that these contracts weren't going to fraudulent businesses. So VA has a department called the Center for Veterans Enterprise, or CVE for short. And originally, CVE was created to help veterans build their own businesses and be entrepreneurial. After 2006, the center was responsible for the verifications as well. CVE is in charge of a database called VetBiz, and it makes sure that the businesses in the database are in fact verified as being owned by a veteran. So starting in 2006 or so, veterans had to show that they had in fact served in the military. If they were applying for a service disabled owned veteran business, they had to show that they were injured, and they had to show proof that they actually owned the company. But even after the 2006 law and the creation of the verification process, reports from the Government Accountability Office were finding that fraud was still a problem. For example, certain large firms not owned by a veteran would use veteran-owned businesses as a front, and these are called pass-through contracts. So another law in 2010 increased the scrutiny of these businesses even more. So my project kind of starts at this point, in that a law that was intended to help veterans and intended to cut out fraud is actually disqualifying legitimate veterans who own businesses and want to do business with VA. So CVE was faced with a huge backlog. And the fact was, if the center hadn't gotten around to verifying an application, that business owner was not eligible to bid on any VA contracts, until it was verified. So a report by the VA's Inspector General, which is like their watchdog, found that as of January 31st, 2011, a little over 6,600 out of 17,000 businesses in VetBiz had actually been verified. In other words, less than 40% had been verified. And the problem wasn't just a backlog. It was, even if CVE had gotten around to an application, they were sometimes inconsistent with how they were interpreting the documents. So for the project, I talked to a Marine who lives in Nebraska now, and she had started her own IT and software business in the 90s. And she became pretty successful contracting with different government agencies, and she had contracted with VA in the past. But because she had to be re-verified after the 2010 law, she resubmitted all her information. The problem was CVE, she says, lost her documents twice, and she was denied twice. She spent a year fighting the denials, and she eventually filed a lawsuit against VA. So there was a real human impact from these laws, and she was my human face to demonstrate that. Most of the sources I found came through witness testimonies at congressional hearings on issues related to small business contracting and veteran-owned contracting. For example, I talked to one veterans business owner advocate who helped me get in touch with this Marine and also other business owners. I also talked to the former head of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization at VA, and that OSDBU for short. So every major federal agency has an OSDBU to encourage small business contracting. And I also talked to lawmakers who were working on issues of contracting reform, specifically lawmakers in the House Small Business Committee. The biggest challenge for me was actually getting to talk to VA and getting information out of VA. So I wanted to talk to the current OSDBU at VA who oversees the Center for Veterans Enterprise. He wasn't available before my deadline. So I tried to get information on staffing and budget for, at CVE and eventually got it. But I thought I might have to file a FOIA because they were taking their time in getting the information. And the budget information actually didn't come through the public information officer I was working with, but I kind of went around her and talked to someone at the Office of the Chief Financial Officer at VA and was more successful in getting the statistics that way. I would do two things differently if I were to approach this project again. One is I would have tried to contact VA much sooner because the stereotype that government is slow and bureaucratic is actually often true. The other thing is I talked to a few congressmen who were somewhat helpful, but actually the most helpful person I talked to from the Hill was a legislative aide in the office of Sam Graves, who's the chairman of the House Small Business Committee. And this aide had actually helped draft a lot of the legislation that I was asking her about. So I think sometimes it's more useful to talk to people behind the scenes who actually have their hands on the day-to-day work of what's going on. So this project is still going on. I'm still doing research, and eventually when it's finished, I'm hoping it'll be published on my work website. So